What you have just listened to was the adhan, otherwise known as the Islamic call to prayer. But for the Muslims watching, it sounds unfamiliar, and that is because the adhan is supposed to be recited in Arabic, which has been the case since the Muslims of the 7th century, and the language itself was specifically picked by Allah to help the Prophet Muhammad to spread Islam to his people. But Arabic was not chosen out of racial superiority, which is something that the Prophet Muhammad made very clear. Instead, Arabic being used in all Islamic customs, including the adhan, has been crucial for uniting all Muslims, regardless of race, into worshipping the oneness of Allah. However, this was not the vision for the founders of the Turkish Republic, who had an alternative view of the Muslim-majority Turkish society. They were influenced by the rise of nationalism across Europe and how it meddled into Christianity. More specifically, how the Bible was translated into different languages, while Latin was becoming abandoned by non-Catholics for their own native tongues. And since the Ottoman Empire was declining while Europe flourished, Turkish nationalists believed that by combating Islam, or at least reforming it, it was necessary to replicate the West. And this idea of nationalism becoming the new guiding ideology of the world led to suggestions of Turkifying the Quran, Turkifying Islamic prayers and sermons, and even the Adhan. All of this influenced Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the first president of Turkey, to radically change Islamic practices through the eyes of Turkish nationalism. And that is why for 18 years, the original Arabic adhan was banned in Turkey, and those that did not comply were punished. And what you just heard before was the Turkish alternative to the adhan, something which caused unnecessary harm to the Muslims of Turkey who simply wanted to practice and worship Allah without the constraints and meddling of the nationalist Turkish government. This all began in 1928 when the Ottoman Arabic script was abandoned for a Latin one, and this was all substantial to Turkish society because it purged many words that had been used for over 1,000 years, especially ones from Arabic or Persian origins. And mind you, this was all achieved in a matter of 6 months. This not only pushed the Turkish public further away from Arabic, but it also allowed Ataturk to then target Islamic customs, including the adhan. So by 1931, all except for one word in the entire Arabic adhan was changed. It went to the point where any mentions of Allah were removed for the word Tanrı, where in some Turkic languages references to the sky god Tenri, once worshipped by ancient Turks. For this Turkish adhan to become popular, it was then introduced during the Islamic month of Ramadan in the year of 1932. Across famous mosques, Arabic became used less and less while Turkish was increasingly used in not only adhans but also for reciting the Quran and Islamic sermons. And by 1932, the Turkish government decided that the Turkish adhan was now compulsory across the country. Through the Department of Religious Affairs, otherwise known as the Diyanet, they stationed police officers outside of mosques to punish anyone that did not comply. But there was some opposition to these laws, including instances where imams would get children and mentally ill people to recite the Turkish adhan as an insult to the government. Yet more backlash came in February of 1933 when a Muslim was severely beaten up by plainclothes police officers in the city of Bursa because he recited the adhan in Arabic. And this led to protests against the Turkish adhan, which was then suppressed by the military, pouring into the city. Following the event, Turkish newspapers insulted the demonstrations, while Ataturk personally bashed them as ignorant and narrow-minded people. Fines were also placed on the Arabic adhan following Ataturk's death in 1941, further punishing those who went against the Turkish adhan. And it was only until 1950 when the Arabic adhan was then legalized under the first democratically elected president, Adnan Menderes. And this is where I want to mention something. Even though the Turkish adhan was eventually abandoned, Ataturk's legacy still affects how Turks practice Islam today. And this is because Ataturk knew that he could not simply remove Islam from Turkish society. And that was because for hundreds of years, Islam was Turkish culture, was Turkish history, and most importantly, Turkish people. So what Ataturk did instead was to blend Turkish nationalism, something that he personally believed in, with Islam. Remember Diyanet, the organization that I mentioned earlier in this video? It's interesting that they were formed on the exact same day that the Caliphate was abolished, the once spiritual and political head of Islam. It was as if Ataturk simply molded Islam into something else. And as someone who comes from the Turkish diaspora, I have noticed the differences between the mosques sponsored by Diyanet to other communities, the Turkish poems they add in the funeral services, the portrait of Ataturk, or even how Turkish imams get constantly shifted around under the orders of the organization. So while the Turkish Adan only lasted for 18 years, Turkish Islam has continued to this day as a form of control in how Turks practice their faith. It may not be as cruel as Ataturk, but the Turkish government still meddles into Islamic customs with some elements of secularism and Turkish nationalism. But when Adnan Menderes returned the Arabic Adhan to Turkey in 1950, I think he summed up how Islam should be treated best.